Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this is Exploder, and after a brief time off period, let's say, doing a best of episode last week, I was in Richmond, Virginia during that time with my wife. And of course, Richmond, Virginia is the most romantic city in the world. I'm kidding. It's great for history. My wife and I both have history degrees, so it was a good thing. It was a good little trip. So I knew I wasn't going to be there at the time when the episode would come out, so I put together a best of episode. But now, we are back recording a new episode just for you. In the previous new episode, if you remember, the Outside Projects, WBF, the WBF, let me say it correctly, all these things, I talked about some of the outside projects of the WWF. In this episode, I want to talk about, I got this idea from Frank, my producer, and he started talking to me about one of the things Hulk Hogan put a lot of products on, and eventually I'm going to do something about these other products. Hulk Hogan put his name behind more than a few, but he brought up Pastamania, and I was like, that is really cool, but then I was like, I couldn't do a whole episode just on Pastamania, but I looked into the subject, and I'll tell you right now, there is a lot of things that overlap between professional wrestling and food. So in this episode, I want to cover the different variations and different restaurants that come from professional wrestlers, whether it's owned or sponsored by an actual wrestler, or it's a regular restaurant that has a wrestling theme. Now, I've already talked about WWF New York and the Nitro Grill. The Nitro Grill, of course, ran at the Excalibur Hotel in Las Vegas for a year. Didn't do great, but what have you. And the WWF New York, aka WWE The World, which was a $36 million money pit. I covered that in the WBF Off episode 2 episodes ago. Check that one out if you haven't heard already. And this one, so I've already talked about them, so I'm not going to spend my time talking about them. What I want to talk about now is wrestling restaurants that are run or owned by professional wrestlers. Now, of course, I'm going to start out with the thing I already mentioned was Pastamania. Pastamania was a pasta restaurant owned by Hulk Hogan, of all people. It was in the Mall of America. If you remember, part of the first Nitro, when they were getting everyone hyped for Nitro and putting it in the Mall of America, which was a really brilliant move by Eric Bischoff. You got to give him credit for that. Part of the promotion and part of the stuff during the show was basically a live-action commercial for Pastamania. Hulk Hogan created this thing called, I don't know who approached him about it, but it was called Pastamania. I keep saying Pastamania like it's a word, but it was the name of the restaurant. And it was a pasta restaurant, a third-rate Olive Garden, I guess. I don't know. That was themed after Hulk Hogan. So, I don't know. Hulk-getty? I don't know how, I don't know. I'm not Italian or anything of that sort. Neither is Hulk. But anyway, yeah, it didn't last that long. Really not much to the story. He had a restaurant called Pastamania. Of course, there's that famous picture of him holding something in his hand. He's got the chef hat on, and that's about as close as he ever actually got to the restaurant. So, yeah. Speaking of, what about Mean Gene's Burgers?
Hey gang, you know me as a stand-up guy who never backs down from a tough interview. Well, now I'm going toe-to-toe with the big burger boys with my Mean Gene Burgers. And this is your chance to order a Mean Gene t-shirt. Mean Gene's Burgers.
The burger that says, "Bite me."
Wear it to work, to a party, to your next court appearance, wherever you want to make a real fashion statement. Call the number on your screen and order yours now.
Call now to order your Mean Gene's t-shirt for just $19.95 plus shipping and handling.
Wrestling announcer, interviewer, Hulk Hogan best friend, and unfortunately a guy who I've seen already too much of in his underwear at certain times. Don't ask. Mean Gene Okerlund had his own chain of restaurants. Not only one, but he had two. First was Mean Gene's Burgers, and then that led to Mean Gene's Pizza. Now apparently this was licensed, and the actual people that ran it were his nephews, as I understand it. And I don't know the full story here. I don't live in the area they were in, but apparently at some point it seemed like his nephews had sort of pushed him out of the business. So they licensed their uncle's name, and their uncle, by the way, is Mean Gene Okerlund, and then they muscle him out so they can run their own pizza place. I don't really, it's a way to shoot low there, fellas. I don't know. Then of course there's the actual successful restaurants. Professional Wrestling Hall of Famer and hepatitis enthusiast Abdullah the Butcher owned 2 restaurants during many, many years. One in Japan and one in Atlanta, Georgia, by the name of Abdullah the Butcher's House of Ribs and Chinese Food. Now, why those two are combined, I have no idea, considering the fact that his gimmick was that he was from Sudan and he was actually from Canada. He's just mixing all things together. As long as he's not in the kitchen, I think we're okay. Reportedly, the Atlanta, Georgia location closed in 2016, and Abdullah the Butcher considers himself now officially retired. So, I'm sure Devin Nicholson's very happy about that, and if you need to know who that is, I don't know what to tell you. Just look it up. Then there's the king of Memphis. That's right, Jerry Lawler, who currently has a restaurant called the Jerry Lawler's Hall of Fame Bar and Grill, which is really a good name. He's a Hall of Famer, a guy in Memphis. Who else is better to have a restaurant? Now, this is not his first restaurant. Previously, he had a restaurant called Jerry Lawler's Slam Burgers, because really, if you're Jerry Lawler and you own a restaurant, what else would you call it? In addition to the Hall of Fame Bar and Grill, he also owns King Jerry Lawler's Memphis Barbecue Company in Cordova, Tennessee. So this is a guy who, in addition to being Jerry the King Lawler, having a restaurant in Memphis, he actually has another place in another part of Tennessee. I think he's doing pretty well for himself, considering his career and his outside endeavors, and for a guy who once ran for mayor of Memphis and failed, I think he's doing pretty good for himself. Then there's the other types of restaurants that are owned by professional wrestlers that aren't necessarily wrestling themed. Starting with Fat Tony's Pizzeria, which used to be owned by Lisa Marie Verone, aka Victoria. Remember Victoria? Alright. She sold the place in 2007 and would try her hand in other businesses and then start up a new place, a wrestling themed restaurant in Chicago, Illinois called the Squared Circle. This will start in March of 2013, but in 2015, Lisa Marie Verone moved back to California and left the company in charge of her husband and a friend. Now, her and her husband eventually got divorced, so you see how that goes. But again, another sort of side project, but again, for what it was, for the time that it was, they worked out. Scott Steiner owns a Shoney's. I just wanted to say that. Scott Steiner owns a Shoney's. This one I didn't know. I actually read up, and I didn't know this before I read it. But apparently Bam Bam Bigelow once had a restaurant called Bam Bam Bigelow, which makes total sense for a guy with flames tattooed on his head. But the restaurant lost a lot of money because he didn't have experience in the industry, and he had to close it. And unfortunately, Bam Bam would die a couple years later. So again, there's a lot going on with his wrestling career, and I didn't know that he actually tried the restaurant game. So it's a little something where you're known for being such a great wrestler, but these little side projects sort of drop off. And I legitimately, until I read this, I didn't know that he had a restaurant at any point. So little fun fact there. And you can't talk about wrestling and food and alcohol and what have you without talking about the Friendly Tap. The Friendly Tap is owned by former WWF referee Tim White, famously known for those dumb segments where he tried to kill himself in front of Josh Matthews, where many people were watching and were going, why couldn't Josh Matthews actually do it for real? I'm saying it seems like a really harsh thing to say about somebody, but have you heard his commentary in TNA? Holy shit. But anyway, this was used in multiple WWF segments. Usually the APA would come in to destroy it for a while because they needed money for a new pool table or something. And the actual bar itself would even appear in some form in, again, WWF SmackDown games, which is pretty neat. Unfortunately, the famed bar is no longer in the hands of Tim White, who he himself has admitted he has sold it to some good people. So while the Friendly Tap is no longer the Friendly Tap we all know and love and remember from WWF programming, it is good to know that it's still existing in some form or another, with Tim White actually working for the company as a talent scout and doing meet and greets and all that stuff. So all in all, everything worked out. And of course, you can't talk about professional wrestling, cash grabs, outside projects, or anything else without talking about Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan owns a restaurant called Hogan's Beach. Here's a fun fact about Hogan's Beach. Hulk Hogan's own restaurant has a dress code that doesn't allow do-rags. I want you to think about that for half a second and try not to bust out laughing. The restaurant would drop Hogan's name in October of 2015 for, reasons, aka racist sex tape. But Hogan would later reopen a restaurant in the Clearwater Beach area called Hogan's Hangout. So, yeah. Then here's a fun one that gets a little bizarre. In Monterrey, Mexico, there's a restaurant called John Cena Burger and Taco. Yes, you heard me correctly. John Cena Burger and Taco. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, he's branched out quite a bit. No, he hasn't. John Cena Burger and Taco is not endorsed by John Cena, the WWE, or anyone with good taste. Oddly enough, there's actually a picture of John Cena on the poster, and I guarantee none of this is legal. Guarantee it. Anyway, the menu has other professional wrestlers that I guarantee did not allow their likeness to be used in this restaurant. So you order based on the wrestler's name. I'll take a Randy Orton. I'll take a Roman Reigns, what have you. It's just a weird place. Currently, it has 3 stars, so it's okay apparently. You won't get dysentery, but you might get a cease and desist letter, but that's really their problem, not yours. If you're in Monterrey, Mexico and want to check out John Cena Burger and Taco, God help you. But hey, I ain't here to tell you how to live your life. Then moving away from professional wrestling themed restaurants that are owned by wrestlers, or even those that are illegally made to look like they're owned by wrestlers, then there's ones that are wrestling themed, but they are by design, but they're not owned by wrestlers themselves. This one I would like to call wrestling culture type restaurants, like the Manor Professional Wrestling Dinner Theater, in which you can pay a regular dinner theater price, and instead of watching a show or some god-awful version of Philadelphia Story, you can see professional wrestling done right in front of a bunch of people chowing down on some meatloaf. I don't know what they serve. Point is, this is a different concept. It's a little bit of wrestling, it's a little bit of theater, it's a little bit of food, so it's a little different. You know, you can't fault them for trying, and it is one of those things I've noticed, and I was like, oh, okay. And then another thing I found when doing research on this topic was the overlap. If you think America's good for this or bad, or however you want to put it, if you want to think that overlap between food and wrestling is strong here, you have seen nothing yet. In Japan, this thing is taken over like gangbusters. Noted badass and gonna kick you in the face, Toshiaki Kawada has a place called Toshiaki Kawada's Noodle Shop. I'm not lying about that. Apparently it's pretty good, does pretty well, and if you don't like it, he'll come out there and drop you on your head. I'm kind of kidding. I don't know. Famous wrestler Killer Khan, who's known primarily in America for his angle where he broke Andre the Giant's ankle, when in reality, the culprit was time and gravity. He has a restaurant in Japan, does pretty well, not a whole lot to say about it. Then, of course, there's Big Daddy, which is owned by the Great Kabuki. I don't know the connection there between being named Great Kabuki and you call the place Big Daddy. Maybe he calls himself Big Daddy. I don't want to assume that anyone else calls him Big Daddy. Don't know. Don't care. Then there's Saka Bar, which is owned by Antonio Inoki, which features posters and statues of the large-chinned wonder. Apparently that restaurant does really well in Japan. But really the big one in Japan is the Ribera Steakhouse. Now, if you've ever, in any regard, whether it's the indies or anything to do with Japanese wrestling, if every once in a while you'll see a Ribera Steakhouse jacket. It's the famous one. It says Ribera and has like the bull head. You'll see wrestlers wear one, and it's really become this rite of passage in Japan. If you're a wrestler, whether you're a gaijin or a Japanese wrestler, whoever, you will eventually, if you're accepted into the culture and accepted into it, they will eventually take you to Ribera Steakhouse. Now, Ribera Steakhouse, supposedly, according to Stan Hansen, was discovered in the wrestling sense, as far as a traditional thing in wrestling, by Bruiser Brody. And he introduced Stan Hansen to it, and then it spread from there. But every once in a while, you'll see someone wearing a Ribera jacket. It's like silk almost. I don't know what it's made of, but it looks like silk, and it's got Ribera on it, and that's sort of this rite of passage. I know I've seen one with Chris Hero wearing one, Cassius Ohno, for anyone who's not paying attention to the history. But yeah, anyone who has a story from Japan, whether it's Carl Anderson, who spent a good chunk of his career there, or Luke Gallows, or Finn Balor, or even AJ Styles. Every once in a while, you'll see someone with a Ribera jacket, or they'll see a picture of someone at the Ribera restaurant. Apparently, they make very good steak. That's what they're known for, is really, really well done steak. And like I said, that's where it came from with Brody. Brody thought it was good because it was hard to find a good steak in Japan. And Brody and Hansen, being Americans, they wanted a good steak, and Brody found one and showed Hansen, and then the legend was born from there. The restaurant itself combines professional wrestling, mixed martial arts, boxing into a theme of really creating a entire culture. Not only the steakhouse, but actually the history of these things in professional wrestling, martial arts, and the like. There are two locations. The original is a place called Gotanda, and the second one, which is run by the owner's son, the creator's son, is in Shimamaguru. I'm sure I butchered that. It's become, like I said, a rite of passage. Now, Chris Jericho says that Stan Hansen discovered it in the 1970s. Now, Hansen, of course, says Bruiser Brody did. Over time, the owner started putting wrestlers' pictures on the wall, and they're usually rotated to represent who's actually touring in the country at the time. So when Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows and those guys were doing it in All Japan, working in New Japan, logically, there was going to be pictures of those guys on the wall sort of to show off, that, again, that mix between the steakhouse and the wrestling culture, which I think is really unique and something that, quite frankly, we don't have in America. The famous Ribera Steakhouse jackets are only given out to selected patrons. It has the bull logo on it, like I said. Road Warrior Animal used to wear them with the Zubaz pants. That is a very dated look, but the jacket survives. Thank God Zubaz pants didn't. And this basically, like I said, a rite of passage for American wrestlers. If you're an American wrestler, you go to Japan, you go to Ribera Steakhouse. Luckily, hopefully, you get your own jacket. And that's the thing, that when you wear that, it's something that the people in Japan know, but when you come back, it's sort of this, like I said, it's a rite of passage, but also sort of a bragging point. That means you worked in Japan. That means you were accepted. That means you went to Ribera Steakhouse. It's one of those little trinkets that, it's just one of those little trinkets that really, it can exemplify your time in Japan. Then on a much smaller scale, still in Japan, is Dropkick Bar. Dropkick Bar is a wrestling, boxing, martial arts themed sports bar that is owned and operated by DDT in the city of Shinjuku. DDT, if you don't know, I've done an episode on their iron metal weight title, whatever the hell it is. That one that's defended 24 hours a day and has been won by a table, a ladder, 4 blow-up dolls, and a mini dachshund. And again, I'm not joking about any of that. The actual bar is owned by the company DDT, and wrestling personalities make appearances there. So again, it's not Ribera. It's a smaller bar, but it's known for that same feel, the mixed martial arts and wrestling and boxing, and personalities make appearances. So it's fittingly sort of a smaller version of Ribera. Not with the same reputation, not even with the same stars, but the fact that it's owned by a wrestling company itself, I think that's pretty unique. And again, that's something that in America you're not going to see, but in Japan, it's something that just fits. And I think that's really unique and really cool. And just as a way to punctuate, to come back on this side of the pond, to punctuate the connection between food and wrestling, here's a funny story. Here's a little piece of trivia. There's currently a catering service being run by a former professional wrestler. You know who it is? Dennis Knight. That's right, Midian and Naked Midian is now a caterer and does very well. As I hear, he does a really good job, and he's really passionate about being a chef. It's not a gimmick. It's not a thing he put his name on. So that's pretty cool to think about that. So just a little tidbit there, sort of the idea that one of the Godwins is out there catering people's food and doing a damn good job of it. So that's pretty cool. That's just a little topic I wanted to cover this time. Again, thanks to Frank for coming up with this idea and let me really go into it. I researched a lot and I found some things out. I knew about some of these. I knew about Ribera. I knew about Pasta Mania and things like that, but I didn't know about I didn't know about Bam Bam Bigelow. I didn't know how long that Abdullah the Butcher's restaurant existed. I didn't know there were 2 of them. So I like to learn along the way, and I like to share with you the information that I find out. But that's going to do it for this topic. For me, we are doing a special live episode taping September 28th at Gromy CDs and Tapes. I will have special guest Frank, my producer, who doesn't do a lot of on-screen stuff as far as a guest on other people's shows. He does ZTO Radio and Last Round of Horror Show and things like that, but he doesn't do a lot of guest stuff, so that's gonna be fun. He's an old school fan. He watched back in the 80s and 90s like I did. And also Saturn Boy, who actually met through professional wrestling. He's a great guy, great DJ, and a big wrestling fan. We're going to be talking about the dumbest things we've ever seen in professional wrestling and playing a nice little game that I like to call NXT or Triple X. Stay tuned for that. This will be a video episode, so not only will you get us talking and conversing about professional wrestling and, as I said, some of the dumb stuff we've seen over the years, but it'll be a video. There'll be a visual version, so you'll actually see what I look like, finally. God help you. And we're gonna have a game. I originally wrote this as a game show. Exploder was supposed to be like a stage show. My background's in stand-up comedy, so my idea was to do like a game show. It didn't work out that way. I ended up doing a blog, and then when I felt like the time was right, then I started producing this podcast. So it sort of evolved over time. But this game I created when it was still a game show. So we're going to do that. We're going to have fun there, and it's going to be a really great time. So enjoy that. We'll also be taping Hillbilly Therapy and The Gromy Show at those tapings. Now, if you're listening in, I don't know, Portugal, whatever, you're obviously not going to come to Gromy CDs and Tapes in Lima, Ohio. I get that. But I'm just telling you about what you're going to see. You're going to see a show that we're going to tape and we're going to put out so everyone can see. So anyone, no matter where you're at, you're going to see this episode. You're going to finally see my ugly mug, and we're going to talk about professional wrestling and what's funny about it and have a little fun at the end. So with that in mind, until next time, my name's Dan. this Exploder. Have a good one.